Hello and welcome to Workforce Wisdom. I'm your host, Christy Bray, Chief Customer Officer at PracticeLink. This podcast focuses on the latest trends in healthcare recruitment, showcasing innovative strategies, success stories, and fresh perspectives that impact the healthcare workforce. These episodes will lead to in-depth, thoughtful discussions with recognized industry-leading healthcare professionals exploring the challenges of healthcare recruitment and beyond. Whether you're an experienced recruitment professional or just starting out, this podcast aims to help you discover how experts are reshaping the industry, leveraging technology, and fostering inclusive hiring practices. Today's episode, Rewiring Medical Recruitment, with Dr. Jason Reminick on building Thalamus, equity, and the future of GME. Welcome, Jason.
Great to be here, Christy. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jason is the co-founder and founder of Thalamus. Dr. Reminick trained in the combined pediatrics anesthesiology residency program at Stanford University Medical Center, Stanford Children's Health, and Lucile Packard's Children's Hospital. He graduated Alpha Omega Alpha from the University of Rochester School of Medicine while concurrently earning his MBA from the Simon Graduate School of Business. He also holds an MS in chemistry and a BA in biochemistry and theater arts from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Reminick is recognized as a Physician of Tomorrow Award recipient by the American Medical Association, and his research is featured in leading medical journals, including the Journal of the American Medical Association and the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. He is a nationally renowned expert on the transition from undergraduate medical education to graduate medical education, including key topics related to residency and fellowship, recruitment, and the match. Welcome again. I'm excited to talk to you today, Jason.
Very excited to be here. So yeah, let's jump in.
Awesome. So I know we met about 5 years ago, which was a very fun meeting right before everything that happened in 2020. It was actually just during the ACGME conference in San Diego. So I'm glad we're both Tennesseans now and can spend some time together.
For sure.
Tell us a little bit about what personal experiences during your medical training inspired you to create Thalamus, and how did those experiences really shape the platform's mission?
Sure. So the idea and experience for Thalamus came about through my own journey in navigating the transition from medical school to residency. I got stuck in New York City during Hurricane Sandy, and many of my interviews were canceled during that time. And that was a lot of the catalyst for what we do today at Thalamus, which is helping applicants and programs schedule interviews and manage the interview management process through the transition to residency and now fellowship as well. My co-founder, Susie, is an anesthesiology residency program director and was recruiting applicants to and through lake effect snow in upstate New York. And so our collective experiences are what allowed us to kind of get Thalamus going. But really what is behind the mission, and the mission of Thalamus is to ensure the right doctor ends up at the right hospital to treat the right patients, is the experiences of my friends and colleagues and my co-applicants who went through this process and go through this process every year. One example of is the week following Hurricane Sandy, I made my way out to interview at a program on Long Island, and there was an applicant who had paid several $100s to take a cab from Staten Island to Long Island in the days before Lyft and Uber and ride sharing, because his car had floated away in the storm and he was unable to reschedule his residency interview. And that was, to me, one of the just very visceral moments in this process, and just what we've had and seen across many, many applicants over the past now 11 years we've been doing this. And so it's that kind of spirit and that kind of need to get medical students into residency programs and beyond to ensure that they can be the doctor that's needed for those patients later on in their career is what drives a lot of what we do at Thalamus.
Yeah, that's a very admirable mission, and we appreciate it, not just PracticeLink, but all of those people who need doctors in their lives. I'd love to know how long that transition took, from the clinical role to leading a tech company. It's a very significant shift. And maybe what challenges did you face during that transition, and maybe how your medical background continues to inform your leadership style today?
In many ways, I've always been an entrepreneur. maybe not a tech entrepreneur, but even just going back to earlier childhood, I funded my own kind of video game experiences in selling video games on eBay as kind of my first venture, I'd say, and started a curling team in college. And I've always tried to find solutions and challenges to problems that I've been trying to solve. And so I think in many ways I've been an entrepreneur probably my entire life. But the whole tech side came about really as I was applying to residency, ended up matching out in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, and really took to the spirit of just innovation that exists out there in Silicon Valley and made my way to meetups and tech conferences, and really just fell in love with just the area's just kind of ability to create and the ecosystem that exists to help those around them create. And so started this company when I was an intern, essentially, or just had finished as a medical student, wrote the initial business plan for my final course as an independent study for my MBA with my co-founder, and eventually just kind of learned throughout that process and from there. And so as I was progressing through my residency, we were kind of doing the earliest years of the company, and then eventually decided to take the huge leap to put my clinical training on hold and pause, and my clinical career on pause to focus on Thalamus full time. And that was in around the end of 2018. And then really just dove in, and it's very much the entrepreneurs, the founders kind of dilemma, and you're just kind of jumping into things and learning them for the first time and going through them and learning as you experience. And there's a lot of things that, I studied in business school in terms of entrepreneurship, but you really only experience when you first actually start doing them. And so it's been very much a learning experience. And I think my clinical career has set me up well for that, because as a training in anesthesia, it's very much something very similar. Like, it's very much highs and lows, ups and downs. When anesthesia cases are easy, they're very easy. And when they are not easy, they are very, very, very not easy, and kind of jumping between those two states. And so it's an overused metaphor, but running a startup as a founder is very much like flying a plane while you're building it, or roller coaster is used as another metaphor and another example as well. And so my anesthesia training definitely has helped me understand that kind of taking chaotic things and finding structure and process around them. And really, I talk about this a lot with candidates too. My leadership style, a lot of it stems from my theater training, which I still think is probably the best degree I've ever gotten and is most useful as a founder within a startup, because I have a degree in directing, and you really start to focus on how do you build from scratch, from words on a page, this kind of dynamic live theatrical performance working in collaboration with actors and stage managers and technical people. And so that's a lot of what has found its way into Thalamus. So if you look at the roots of Thalamus, our three values are bravery with purpose and challenging the status quo, which is very much what exists and has been the outcome of what Thalamus does. What we call imagination optimized, which is very much coming out of the imagination and the creativity of Silicon Valley, and then genuine collaboration, which stems from those theatrical experiences with just how our team is working overall. And those values and being very intentional about those values has also been very useful in defining my leadership style, but also helping us grow and helping me grow as a tech entrepreneur, tech founder, et cetera, and helping build our team and our organization to where it is today.
And I think it's a great analogy you used there. I do think the production side of what you got in that degree is probably what helps you a lot to push things forward. Is it common for physicians to do some concurrent programming like that, the MBA piece, or is that kind of a nuanced thing?
It's becoming more common. I don't know if I would call it common, but it has been growing in popularity over the years. I think there's a lot of reasons to do it or not do it. We could probably do an entire podcast just on that as well. But I think it is becoming increasingly more common. And to me, it's a bit of a passion of mine that physicians should be leading in many things in healthcare, because I think we have a very unique perspective to drive things forward with the ultimate goal of improving clinical care for patients.
I think anytime more education is given or provided is always helpful. We spend a lot of time, as recruiters, you do spend a lot of time educating new residents and fellows of the job market and contracts and comp, and any forward thinking in that would be awesome for schools or others to provide. So let's talk about Thalamus, as a platform, and maybe for our listeners, go back a few steps. And then I want to talk about cortex and cerebellum and the other pieces that you have that really enhance the residency and application process. But for those not familiar, give us kind of the background of what at the core Thalamus is trying to solve.
Yeah, sure. So at the core of Thalamus, we actually call the product Thalamus Core. It's our interview scheduling platform and kind of where we started. So it solves the problem of programs and applicants having to send out thousands of emails or complete thousands of phone calls, which is kind of what I had to do back in my day. But essentially, it's a software as a service that hospitals use. They're able to set up their calendars for their interview scheduling. They may be interviewing, depending on the size of the program and the specialty, anywhere from 20 people to 1,000 people over a 6-month period, either through residency and or fellowship recruitment processes. And they set this up. They invite the applicants to interview after pulling in application data from the main application services. We'll talk about our collaboration with the AAMC as well. But it then sends the applicant an email with a link to create a profile, and then they're able to get on the calendar 5 seconds later and kind of book their residency and or fellowship interview in real time, kind of like Open Table, but instead of booking a restaurant, they're booking an interview. And then back on the hospital side, it's a process-specific applicant tracking system to allow them to score candidates, evaluate them, and manage this process. With COVID, we extended the platform to accommodate virtual interviewing. We have our own homegrown video interview platform, but we also integrate via Zoom, Teams, and WebEx via API. We have our tool Cortex, which is an application review and screening tool that uses technology, predominantly AI, natural language processing, and optical character recognition to screen and aggregate and accumulate key application data. And then Cerebellum is our data and analytics platform that measures all of the data in terms of the outcomes related to the recruitment process overall. So collectively, that incorporates the Thalamus platform, Thalamus Core, Cortex, Cerebellum, and Thalamus Video. And we also have an itinerary wizard that builds these very complicated schedules for programs as well. And so it's been the most widely used platform. Happy to dive in more.
I appreciated the chance of getting to participate in your user group earlier this year to really just sit and listen and observe from those program coordinators and some of the physicians that were there. But there's just a gap. We've talked about some of the struggles with the match process and then the volume of people and how do these programs really sift through that and find the folks that will succeed in their program. So you've got over 8,000 residencies and fellowship programs currently utilizing Thalamus. What feedback have you gotten from those users to really influence the future development and as you've started to add additional applications within the tool?
Yeah, it's funny you point that out. Yeah, that was our first user conference, Thala Us, and we're all about the puns at Thalamus. So Thalamus has the Thala Us conference. But we've always been very much about community and receiving feedback, and that's really helped us get off the ground and continue to grow and serve and provide solutions to this community. It is a very, very convoluted and complicated process that requires really a lot of subject matter expertise, and that's been both a benefit and also just it allows us to receive a lot of feedback. And so we've been working now with thousands of programs over the last 11 years. The reason we've kind of grown to this 8,000 programs now across essentially over every academic medical center is the strategic collaboration we formed with the Association of American Medical Colleges back in April of 2023, and now serving as the main technology and interview management platform provider for this process through them and working with many, many programs now. And so we've worked with many of the different specialties, institutions, programs, program directors, program coordinators, and have gotten feedback really about all different components of our platform. We started with the interview scheduling process through Thalamus Core. There have been continued many different use cases as to how programs even schedule their interview. But as we've extended the platform to accommodate scoring and evaluation and selection and review and building rank lists for the match, and essentially everything from the application process all the way through composition and submission of the rank lists, learning about all of the different nuances across specialties, institutions, programs, and responding to that. This community is not shy at all in providing that feedback. We are consistently building on top of the solutions that we have and continuing to enhance them. And it's really helped us find success and is really the secret sauce of what we're doing at Thalamus, to the point that many of our former users make up most of our support and customer success teams today in being program coordinators. And so we're very passionate about this community and building solutions for this community because we are from this community and we really understand it and really want to solve it for everything everyone's experiencing.
Yeah, I was impressed at how many folks you've recruited over to join your team that have really that breadth of knowledge in terms of navigating kind of the institutional piece of GME. You've gone through kind of the mission is connect the docs, right? So in terms of specific strategies that you're using to mitigate bias and really promote fairness in the residency selection process, are there certain things that inherently you build within the technology, or are those things you train and they live outside of maybe that SaaS environment that you've created?
I think it's a combination of everything. And I think more of it's just a very intentional philosophy in that this is what we've been trying to do. And it has been a part of Thalamus's core DNA since our inception. This is one of the driving factors behind Cortex, which was our tech-assisted holistic application review and screening tool. And so we took a very intentional approach from building that product from the ground up, and really every product that we've built since, having the very hard discussions up front as to how does a particular design choice or a particular feature benefit and or harm certain groups of applicants in one way or another, or certain types of programs, be they large programs or smaller programs, more community-based programs, or on the applicant side, U.S. allopathic students versus osteopathic students versus international medical graduates, et cetera. And so we've built a lot of different ways to analyze applicants, and we're asking about if we apply this filter, if we apply this type of sort, or the way that we show particular applicants on a various page, does that change or insert any bias? And it comes down to being able to screen various fields and blind users to various components and various elements of data, like people's names, photos, where they went to medical school, where they went to residency, all of these different pieces of data. And when do you show these pieces of data or not show these pieces of data? And what do you make configurable for programs? On top of that, then, so that's kind of how we build software. But then from there, when you start looking into how do you help train your users and help them use this software, we've done things like a holistic review workshop with institutions where we go in and we sit with them, and we sit with our colleagues and the selection science team at the AAMC, and we go through what conscious and unconscious bias looks like. What are they trying to accomplish with their selection? What is the mission of their residency and or fellowship programs? What are they trying to do in terms of the educational mission of those programs? What types of physicians are they trying to educate in their programs? And then from there, help to teach them how to use the software and the many tools that we've built to really provide and find those physicians that they need. So it's kind of starts very much at the core of the organization, finds its way into how we build our products, and certainly how we support and enable our users on the other side as well.
They described it as a holistic approach in helping them achieve those goals. And I know at your user conference earlier this year, really talking about the space for virtual interviews or being able to get through the volume of applicants that some programs have in a meaningful way, not just throw out a certain section because they check a different box. So I think that that's very thought driven in what the platform can do.
And it's very much how we approach all of this, and trying to use data to make decisions as well, and being able to measure things. Bringing more objectivity overall to the process is a main goal and focus of ours.
So when we met in the early days of 2020, and after the pandemic, it's accelerated a lot within technology, a lot more adoption, obviously work from home and doing things virtually. Within the GME space, I'm making the assumption that it also accelerated the adoption of virtual interviews versus hosting those potential new residents on site visits. How did Thalamus really help the programs adjust to that change? And then do you see it staying that way, or what other impacts might be affecting that resident interview process?
I remember in the days before COVID, we had some advisors asking us, when will this industry go towards virtual interviews? And I said it was very unlikely, despite some drastic shift in the way this is done. And then sure enough, a year later or so was COVID, and that provided that drastic shift. And we saw kind of overnight, the entire world obviously need to move to a more virtual space, and GME needed those solutions as well. And so in many ways, that was part of the growth story of Thalamus as well, because we were at an emergency medicine conference in New York City in the earliest days of COVID, when we were first starting to hear about COVID, and 5 doctors tested positive for COVID at that conference in the earliest days, and it made the front page of the Post. So we were kind of there. And that next day, we decided as an organization to start building a virtual interview solution. And from there, that was when we were working with a few hundred programs in the earlier days of Thalamus. And over the next 30 to 60 days, we grew to 2,500 programs, which is pretty wild because the community needed a virtual interview solution and we were working to build that. And the one that we've built not only allows for just the ability to run a virtual interview with video conferencing software, et cetera, but it also mimics what GME did in terms of just the overall workflow of their interview day. And that's kind of something we've been more broadly focused on. But the community shifted for several years, even following COVID, to 100% virtual interviews across essentially all specialties. And I'd say 80-ish% to maybe 85% of specialties and programs are still interviewing virtually today. Some have switched to a more hybrid format where they allow applicants to interview virtually and or come in person. There are some of the more competitive surgical specialties and just competitive specialties in general that are recruiting people for a very lengthy period of time, have decided for the most part to switch back to in-person. There are also some programs that tend to be more rural and or based in underserved communities outside the larger cities and larger population dense centers who are also doing in-person interviews as well as an option, and sometimes in terms of a hybrid option, to allow applicants the ability to see that geographic area and learn more of what it's like to be in that community. There's also many programs that are still interviewing virtually and then doing what they're calling second looks, where they are allowing applicants to come for a second time in a very low stakes kind of way to just see what being a resident or a fellow at this particular training program is like in person after their more formal interview day, which is done virtually. Just like everything in GME, there's a lot of different nuance and a lot of different ways to slice this.
Well, that growth is wild, and I know we'll get into that a little bit, and then some of the other support that you're providing to the AAMC. As you walked through that process, it's very similar to job recruitment, or what we call in-house recruitment, where PracticeLink audience, they're the day in, day out recruiters. Some may overlap to the GME programs, but it's very much the same in terms of attracting that talent to the program. And I'm sure those rural and underserved areas have just as hard of time filling slots as recruiters do filling jobs.
For sure. And I think that's the really interesting piece of this. You look at this entire physician educational pathway and these transition points, be it medical school to residency, residency to fellowship, fellowship to first job, early career job, second job, third job, fourth job. A lot of the challenges are very similar across each one of these transition points. A little bit nuanced in the GME space because of the presence of the match and such as well. But certainly, yes, those areas that are hard to recruit for physician recruiters are very correlative in the GME and UME space as well for undergraduate medical education.
So take us back to the partnership and what you've been able to accomplish and support the AAMC. And it doesn't have to be the complete history, but I would love to learn more about how you've become such a valued partner in the training space for physicians.
I think it comes back again to kind of just overall mission alignment, in that we were two organizations that for quite a while were building competitive solutions to solve a similar challenge. And we were growing in market share. Their solutions were also growing in market share. And after several years of discussions, we came together and AAMC came to us and said, we see a real path forward here for organizations to work together. We entered into discussions with them and really saw, as we were learning more about each other's organizations, there was a lot more similarities than differences, at least in terms of the broader outcomes that we wanted to see in terms of making this process better for applicants, programs, advisors, GME offices, et cetera, and just broader society and patients. And so our mission and their mission, there was a lot of overall overlap, and that kind of set the foundation. And I'm heading to a conference tomorrow in Minneapolis where we're going to tell this story as well, looking at data structure in a data symposium that I'll be at. And it's very much aligning two very different organizations, one an educational nonprofit with an early stage startup. There's very few business cases. I feel like we're in many ways writing the business case overall here, but it's taking that broader mission and letting that set kind of the North Star for the overall collaboration has been very, very positive. And we've seen success coming out of that. And that the second part of the growth story beyond COVID is we went from that mid 2,500 3,000-ish programs up to now 8,000 programs, which is roughly 80 to 85% market share of all programs in the country, which I think just broadly is representative of the success of this collaboration. And the other piece behind that, and what drove a lot of this, is the data and the understanding of how do we understand this interview market and measure this interview market in ways that weren't possible before. The AAMC has done a great job of measuring the application market. The NRMP and the Match have done a great job of measuring the outcomes. But the interview process was very, very hard to measure because no one had the data. And now in many residency specialties, for instance, we have over 90% of the data. So this near population level data to understand how many interviews are applicants going on, how many do they complete, what do different types of applicants look like that are predictive of more or less interviews, how do you guide programs, applicants, and advisors in this process to really understand the true story of what's going on versus the kind of myths and internet legends that have existed prior as well. And so all of that kind of came together and has really resulted in this very, very strong collaboration to the point that Thalamus raised a Series B recently, and the AAMC came in as a strategic investor, which was also a first for them as well, but also speaks to the success and the overall growth of this collaboration going forward.
That has to be a great feeling to uncover, like you said, two very different organizations, to uncover those similarities and commonalities that you could come together in force and in such a successful way to support these folks that are choosing to go into medicine.
For sure. And it's been an interesting journey to watch, but it seems like it's growing stronger each day, which has been great.
So you talked a lot in that last piece just about data, and I wanted to go into some of the advanced analytics that Thalamus and the cerebellum portion of it offer. What are they doing with that data? And in terms of first ensuring privacy and security, because it is a lot of data that the candidates are loading in. And then how do programs use that data? How do they process it? And maybe kind of go into that for us a little bit.
For sure. And to me, the data piece is the most exciting piece of the entire collaboration. And we want to make sure that data is secure. And so we're going through security screens and various security measures to make sure that data is protected, and working with our institutional partners on the academic medical center side to ensure that all those screens are gone through as well. And the AAMC has very high security standards, and Thalamus works alongside them and along with them to ensure that those standards are met with penetration testing and data encryption and all of kind of the bells and whistles to keep data secure. And just knowing how important that data is to this community and to the programs and the applicants, we take that very, very seriously. But the benefit of that data and what we've been able to measure has been pretty immense, starting with One Cerebellum, which is our data and analytics dashboard. It provides aggregate recruitment level data at both the individual residency and fellowship program level, as well as the broader institutional level for healthcare systems, and it rolls up that data overall into that process. So Cerebellum, which has both the ability to measure data at the program level for individual residency and fellowship programs, but also at the institutional level for rolling up that aggregate data for the institution and the academic medical center. And what it does is it takes kind of those key performance indicators, be they general interview statistics benchmarked against other programs in the specialty, or looking at the self-identification of applicants as they go through the process and kind of funnel views for programs to understand where they may or may not be losing portions of their applicant pool, geographic analyses, looking at when programs are sending out invites and completing interviews versus others in the country as well. And so just a lot of different possibilities to drive and measure data within that process, and then roll that up to the institutional level and also provide benchmarking against the US Census and patient populations and other components there as well. And so that's kind of where Cerebellum has come in now that we have these near population level data sets of residency and fellowship specialties. We're also able to look at broader interview distributions and provide key insights into the interview distributions and how many interviews each applicant is getting and how many interviews each program is completing, kind of everything you'd want to know about cancellations and waitlisting and what types of applicants end up on which parts of these interview distributions, etc. It becomes even broader than that in terms of using that interview data now to be in a tool called the Dean's Workstation, which is a tool by the AAMC that medical school advisors use to help guide their students through the residency recruitment process, and Residency Explorer, which is a combined tool from many of the organizations within the proverbial house of medicine, AMA, ACGME, NRMP, along with the AAMC and ERIS, to provide students with better guidance as to what happens in terms of outcomes within that process to help them strategically understand which programs they should be applying to, which for the longest time had application and match data, and now also includes Thalamus interview data as part of this collaboration. And so really just providing more insight to the community. But where it gets even more exciting is just the amount of research that we're able to do to understand how to streamline and optimize this process further, to work with the institutions and the academic medical centers to give them better data reporting overall as well, and then also to just better understand how can we measure this component of the physician educational pathway to inform downstream the number of residency slots and fellowship slots around the country, which is of course funded by Medicare through CMS and HRSA, along with the ACGME, and then look downstream even further to the physician recruitment space. And that's where kind of the intersection with Thalamus and PracticeLink occurs as well. And so a lot of exciting things with the data. This to me is the most exciting piece of this collaboration.
Yeah, and I think you led to what my comment was going to be about using that data to hopefully influence policy change in terms of additional slots for residencies and funding, probably the most important. So you led into kind of, are you able to take this information, or who is taking the information further in terms of that advocacy in Washington, D.C.?
So we've had a lot of discussion there with Congress and the House and the Senate and CMS, HHS, HRSA, the White House, across both administrations now. And so there's a lot of discussion and a lot of interest in expanding and growing the physician workforce to what the United States needs in terms of a physician's workforce. And it's a very bipartisan approach on both sides of the aisle, because everyone in every district, congressional district or otherwise, needs doctors. And that includes the largest cities to the smallest rural and underserved communities as well. And so this data, which is immediately upstream of the broader physician workforce, is our way to be able to measure that as a country and inform that policy to understand where should we put more residency slots if we need to expand the workforce, and in what specialties and in what portions of the country and what geographic areas, and then how do we drive strategies to ensure that those spots fill in the match or through other means, or how do we ensure that those residency slots result in that doctor finishing training there in that specialty and or staying there after they finish training. And so it's all part of this much broader continuum, and it's immediately upstream of the U.S. physician workforce, which is the largest industry that drives our entire economy and represents a sixth of our GDP as well.
Very impressive numbers. And I think that listeners of this podcast, and then obviously PracticeLink customers, would fully support, any efforts to grow, because we are all living in the physician shortage that will probably outlive me, at least in my lifetime. So it's appreciated, the work that you're doing to make it better, and trying to really provide and drive influence based on data of what we can do. I know typically that AAMC, when they produce their data on residency retention, we like to look at that, especially in some of the specialties, family practice, psychiatry. Those folks tend to stay where they train. And, for recruiters, if you're not leveraging those relationships with nearby or maybe even internal GME programs, I think you're missing out, because the data that I've read, at least from the AAMC, it's very predictive. So there are certain specialties, and maybe even broader than that. If you engage these residents and fellows, they're probably very interested in staying, continuing to work there in your community.
We know from our own data that geography is the largest driver of the match, even at the residency level, and particularly same state. If you grow up in a state or go to medical school in a state, you have the highest likelihood of matching in that state. And that holds for any state in the country, in any region, et cetera. And we've written academic papers on this in peer-reviewed journals in both anesthesia as well as primary care for pediatrics, internal medicine, and family medicine. And that's probably not a surprise to anyone. What's surprising to us was just how strong of a correlation there was. Like looking at the anesthesia market, I know offhand in Tennessee, for instance, if you grow up in Tennessee or go to school in Tennessee, you have a 51% chance of matching into anesthesia in Tennessee. But if you're from outside of Tennessee, that number drops to 14%. And so you can go state by state, and those numbers stay pretty wide like that, which is just pretty fascinating. So then when you start looking at residency retention as well, like, yes, where you train eventually dictates where you practice. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here as well, unless someone finds a partner or a spouse and that spouse's family is from somewhere else in the country and people move to be near grandparents or family or otherwise. But geography is a major, major driver of all of this. And this data helps us measure that as well. But then to understand that, as we need to fill those family medicine positions, those psychiatry positions, like what strategies can we take collectively with academic medical centers, the federal government, state governments, policymakers, anywhere in between, physician recruiters, physician recruitment offices, the CMOs of hospital systems, to help guide just the broader policy to ensure that those physicians that are needed in those areas are either recruited there or brought in there earlier on in their educational career and then retained there when they finish their training.
And I think that's key. You touched on a lot of different folks within an organization that collaboration is really, really key. A program I was associated with in Northern Colorado when we started a rural training track for the family medicine residency, we just knew it would be successful in the long term from placing providers in that community, much needed, obviously, and wholeheartedly agree that if you take the time to have those relationships with the folks training in your area, or then building some of those bridges like an RTT that really help to showcase those communities and all that their practice can be when they're in that type of an area.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that kind of across the board now, and it's been very encouraging to me, at least on the graduate medical education side. We're now seeing not only necessarily for-profit systems and just larger academic centers saying we're retaining X% of residents for a particular reason. There are actual corporate and educational strategies being formed to retain a particular group of physicians, actually going down to the medical school level now as well. States are taking actions to ensure X percentage of state residents make up the majority of their medical school classes on the hypothesis that they'll eventually end up staying and training there. And so it's encouraging for me to see, and certainly in rural areas for that collaboration to exist as well. It just ensures greater success. And so to me, that's where that synergy exists between the UME and GME space and the physician recruitment space as well. And those partnerships across that physician educational pathway can really result in a lot of success for the in-house recruiters, the academic systems, the for-profit systems, et cetera, and the physicians too.
Everybody wants to be satisfied in their career choice and where they end up, especially if you've spent that long in training.
Did you know PracticeLink is not only home of the most widely used online physician job board, but we also have our own magazine? PracticeLink magazine has not only won several awards, including 2 ASPE Awards of Excellence in 2023, but it's also completely free. Over 375,000 physicians and residents receive copies of PracticeLink magazine each year, and you can too by visiting practicelink.com/magazine. That's practicelink.com/magazine. Thank you for listening. Now we'll return to the podcast.
I know Thalamus exhibits at the AAPPR conference and has been involved with some presentations to their members. Is there anything for our recruiter or sourcing team audience that you might share in terms of what you're seeing with pipeline and the potential to partner with the programs as we've mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's about building those connections and those relationships. I think we're seeing more overall corporate strategies kind of dictating that GME can certainly serve as a funnel and a channel within which to recruit the physician workforce. And to me, it seems a lot like a no-brainer in the sense that you have physicians that are training at your health system or in some of your facilities in the ways in which your health system works. This is the first job and only job that they've ever had. So building those relationships and understanding those connections with residents, I don't think can start too soon. I've heard that some hospital leadership is going to go meet some interns in some particular specialties that they're having more challenging recruiting out of, and more the procedural based specialties kind of at their orientation when they start their intern year. And I think that's a pretty impressive signal and symbol as to how important it is to build those relationships, because your highest likelihood of recruiting anyone is someone who is already at your health system. And so I'm excited to see that. And I think it also just benefits the learners and the residents and the fellows because they're at your institution usually for a particular reason. A lot of times we've already discussed is because of that geographic connection. And so what better way to build those relationships and those foundations than both sides coming together earlier on and setting up more of a trajectory and a career goal and a career path, rather than what seems to be more of the historic has been the residents are focused on their education, wait till 6 months from graduation going, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing next. And the recruiter's going, okay, we need to fill these particular clinical roles. Oh, who are the residents we have in these roles and how do we find them and how do we keep them? And so the system was the way that it was for many, many reasons, both macro and micro, et cetera. But now just being very intentional about building those relationships and understanding as a health system, what are you looking to do with your GME training and your GME trainees, and who should you retain and why? And having those same goals that the GME programs are starting to put together in terms of what are the purpose of their programs and the educational missions, extending that downstream, or if you're the physician recruiter, extending it upstream into the GME space, but just what are the overall health systems goals and how do these two units that in many ways know each other and many health systems have worked very closely together for years, be even more intentional about that to bridge that connection between the educational space into the tending physician and beyond space.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That intentional outreach, going to their first day orientation or those types of things is just really key. It's a terrific first step. It really sets yourself up to retain those folks. I'm curious over the next couple of years if we see how that transitions, because there are medical students, as you said, there are interns rotating through these hospitals as well. And that was always a fun thing. If we could get a medical student, as soon as they matched, they had a contract in hand and we would put them on a stipend throughout their residency, not only give them some extra money, but we knew they were from a certain community and were going back there. And it really just created a sense of peace, I think, for everybody. I'm sure we're waiting 3 or 4 years for you, but we're so excited and we're here to support you and be successful when you get here.
No, and I think creative solutions like that are really, really important, particularly in a world where it's getting very, very hard to find certain types of physicians for certain clinical roles and clinical jobs. That expense is immense. And so if you can mitigate that expense through a stipend or some other form of benefit to help just these early career physicians with loans or otherwise, it's a great way to build that brand and that overall relationship with these populations.
Well, speaking of the future, tell us a little bit about what features or expansions that folks might expect from Thalamus, if it's new product or maybe some new partnerships that you've got in your horizon.
We're very much looking to work more downstream. And for us, that immediate next downstream step is really focusing at the institutional level, particularly the designated institutional official or the DIO or the dean, or at the GME level, the director of GME, et cetera, to help the institutions with better management of their overall data and their data capabilities with regards to reporting and how their programs are doing in terms of their overall recruitment, to help institutions have more actionable strategies and also have more streamlined data flows. There's a lot of data work done at the institutional level that is done by hand, putting together lots of different Excel spreadsheets with recruitment outcomes across the various programs, and really having that source of truth and that data to understand how their recruitment is going to help set that strategy, that exact strategy we just talked about with who should we be recruiting into our residency and fellowship programs and why. And that also helps working with other industry partners and finding better ways to put data into residency management systems and softwares, which is the next immediate downstream phase to Thalamus. But then also just looking downstream more at the broader physician recruitment workforce as well. What technology solutions can we bring there, coming more upstream from the GME space into the physician recruitment space? And that's why we've been going to AAPPR to learn more about the industry and develop those relationships and those partners. And certainly a lot of the collaboration we've had with PracticeLink has been a big proponent of that. And we've been really appreciative of that and the many collaborative efforts our teams have had going back many, many years. And so really finding out how to bring more technology and more data from the GME side of the world into the physician recruitment space is kind of where we're aiming next, to ensure that that right doctor ends up at that right hospital to treat the right patients and satisfy that mission.
Yeah, just over the years, my phrase ends up being something like, you have to have the physicians to keep the doors open. It is the very basic element, not to downplay the other roles that are vital to the physician's success and obviously the patient outcomes, but we got to keep the doors open at the end of the day for the hospitals and the clinics and surgery centers, whatever it might be. And I think with the population growth and age, we're just at this very compressed point right now where everybody has to be thinking about innovative ideas or creative solutions to solving the gap in the workforce.
The doctors are needed to keep the hospitals and the health systems running. And so finding those doctors is key and critical.
So I think as we start to wrap up, I'd love to hear some reflections. So think back in the Thalamus journey, what has been maybe some of the most rewarding moments that you've had and maybe some lessons you've learned, significant growth over the past less than 10 years, okay? So significant growth and partnership for you, but do you have something that's really been that key moment that you said, I know I'm doing this for the right reasons?
It's a similar kind of experience that we have. We try to measure these, and they've been happening at increasing frequency. And it's when we're talking to a candidate and they're able to tell us a story, just coming to join our team or otherwise, and they're able to tell us a story of someone they know that has used Thalamus and what the outcome has kind of been from that. Or we're at an academic medicine conference and a program coordinator comes up to us and tells us this story about how Thalamus helped them do this and helped them do that. And it all goes back to that first story we started with, that applicant who paid several $100s to get a cab out to their residency interview. Like, what is this broad impact that we're having, and how do we measure that impact? We measure it through these stories and these narratives of just hearing the impact it's had on individuals. And we can look at all the data and we can look at all of the interview distributions, but at the end of the day, it's the people and the person behind it. And to me, the most welcoming things and the most heartwarming things are when the people come to us and tell us the stories of the impact that Thalamus is having. And we go, okay, that's why we're doing this. That to me is the most inspiring thing, but also the most impactful thing I've seen on this journey. And it's no one particular encounter, but it's the aggregate and it's the increasing number of such encounters.
Well, I know at PracticeLink, we definitely appreciate the partnership that we have with Thalamus and your team, and then all that you're doing to ultimately educate and provide care across the country. On behalf of PracticeLink, really want to thank you again, Jason, for appearing on Workforce Wisdom today. For our listeners, please feel free to reach out with any thoughts, insights, or questions about anything we covered. You can email us at plmedia@practicelink.com. If you're a program coordinator or director interested in learning more about the Thalamus GME platform, please check out their website at thalamusgme.com. My name is Christy Bray. Thank you again for listening to Workforce Wisdom.